Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to January's interactive webinar for special education surrogate parents, presented by the Recruitment, Training, and Support Center at the Federation for Children with Special Needs. My name is Jane Greco, and I am the Training and Support Specialist at RTSC. If you are interested in learning more about the Federation, please go to our website at www.fcsn.org and explore all the different programs and training opportunities. Our presenter today is Dr. Nancy Rappaport, co-author with Jessica Minahan of the new book, The Behavior Code, a practical guide to understanding and teaching the most challenging students, published by Harvard Education Press. The book is highlighted on the Federation website and can be purchased there through Amazon. The webinar is being recorded so that those who could not attend can retrieve it on our website at a later date, and that is also at www.fcsn.org. We have had a tremendous response to this webinar, so in order to minimize background noise, everyone but the presenter will be muted. If you have any questions, please type them into the toolbox to submit them. I will be watching the questions come in and will present them to Dr. Rappaport as time allows. Lastly, please take a few seconds to answer our 3-question survey before you log off. Please submit your questions for the teleconference at this time, or you can email them to me prior to Thursday, 12:30 p.m. And my email address is jcreco, C-R-E-C-C-O, @fcsn.org. Also, we'd like to let you know that on February 6th at the Federation offices in Charlestown, Dr. Rappaport and Jessica Minahan will be presenting a live seminar on their book, The Behavior Code. If you'd like to attend this live seminar, please call Emily at 617-399-8342 in order to register. There will be limited seating for that particular seminar. Good afternoon, Nancy. Are you ready to go?
I'm ready.
Okay. Go for it.
Okay. First of all, I just want to say hello to everybody. I hope you're eating lunch or doing something nourishing during this hour as I talk to you about a fairly loaded topic on sexual behavior with kids. And just to give you a little bit of background about who I am, what we're going to cover. I'm an associate professor at Harvard Medical School, and I've worked for 20 years in public schools. And I teamed up with Jessica Minahan, who's a behavioral analyst. I'm a child psychiatrist, and thought about what are the behaviors that really make school folks nervous. And the 4 behaviors that we thought about were oppositional behavior, you're not the boss of me, anxious kids, get away from me, sexualized children, I didn't mean to, and withdrawn kids, I don't care. Interestingly enough, probably for us as authors and Harvard Ed Press, we were most anxious about approaching sexualized behavior, and it turns out that actually it seems like there's been almost no research done by educators or anything written about how to manage this. So we pulled together our clinical experience, and Jessica, that's my dog back there, but she'll quiet down in a minute, I promise. Jessica Minahan and has practical strategies, having worked with children in the school, with the teachers, and I have worked doing safety assessments, which are these very intensive assessments that you do when a school is asking the question, is this student safe to come back? So first I want to ask us to think about what is sexually inappropriate behavior in the classroom. How do we define that? Because that's important for us to have as something that could be helpful. So the first thing is it's using sexual words or phrases to peers or teachers, and making sexual gestures or noises, engaging in pretend play that stimulates sex. Hold on, I'm just going to make that dog stop doing this. Just 1 second, okay?
Yes, The mailman is arriving. Nancy said that that might happen and that the dog would start barking, so we apologize for the slight interruption. And she will be right back. And I hope everybody is able to see the PowerPoint now.
My sincerest apologies, you guys. I just didn't want to have 40 minutes of a dog barking. Are you still here with me?
We are here. Yep.
Okay. Okay. So that's a first probably for you, a raging dog in the background.
No
Okay.
problem.
So let's go back to what's sexually inappropriate behavior in the classroom. Making sexual gestures or noises, engaging in pretend play that simulates sex, making sexual invitations to others, inappropriately touching another person, and, of course, a total showstopper is masturbating in the classroom. So, fortunately, sexually inappropriate behavior is relatively rare, but if I was going to say what's the most upsetting thing for teachers, if you ask veteran teachers or you ask a novice teacher, it's definitely sexualized behavior is up there with a child who may be physically aggressive in the classroom. And in my experience doing safety assessments, it's often the fast track to a self-contained classroom or an out-of-district placement because of the concerns about protecting other students, the fact that other parents can get highly aggressive isn't the right, but highly on alert and want the child to basically be somewhere else. And what I'm urging with us thinking today is how do we contain the anxiety, the adult's anxiety, which is appropriate, and come to clinical decisions that we make on a case-by-case basis where we try to come up with appropriate responses to sexualized behavior. So the next thing I want us to think about is who are we talking about? What's really important on the outset is to say I'm not talking about kids who may be sexually harassing another student. Now you may say there's some overlap here, but if there are sexual harassment policies and legal avenues in response to targeted behavior towards another student. The students that we're going to be looking at together are, and partly I also want us with sexualized behavior to develop a differential diagnosis, are impulsive students, students with social deficits, and students with trauma histories. So before we launch on that, it's important to provide context about normative sexual behavior in childhood. And when is it age appropriate or problematic behavior? So preschoolers will naturally be interested in how body parts function. Any of us who have kids certainly know that experience or worked in kindergarten classrooms, know how curious young kids can be and can kind of examine their body parts. Elementary students will joke about body parts and processes, farting, burping, anything that kind of makes a noise can be really interesting and humorous. Middle schoolers likewise will have, will tend to there'll be high affect around sort of topics of anything sexual, and in this part where I'm going to bring up next is a little bit dicey in terms of doctor play is something that when we reviewed the literature, that's something that's normal in young children when in the description of the National Trauma, the NTSA, the wording they use is mutual and non-coercive when it involves other children and it does not cause emotional distress. Clearly, doctor play is not something we want happening in school, but we were just trying to give the range of normative sexual behavior.
Nancy, Dr. Rappaport, I did have a question come in from possibly a parent who is asking what happens when the school does not do anything about the behavior, the sexualized behavior of a student. What would be the best path for a parent to take?
Well, hopefully I'll address that through this, but The first thing I would say is for a parent to ask for what's called a functional behavioral assessment to be done, so that they can, and to also slow down the disciplinary process. Because what frequently can happen is that a school will move towards suspension or expulsion for sexualized behavior without coming up with a differential diagnosis and then addressing teaching the skills. So it's a perfect question that I hope during this presentation that I can give some concrete ideas to parents about even how to have a discussion with them.
Okay, great. Thank you.
So some of the motivations for kids having sexualized behavior in school can be anxiety, need for intention, imitation, and sometimes the sexualized behavior can be driven in the context of there having been abuse, family adversity, exposure to parental violence, or exposure to adult sexual behaviors or materials. That being said, if there was sort of a take-home that I would say for people is the schools, and I've seen this happen over and over, can often have an automatic response when they have a child with sexualized behavior, and it's dramatic sometimes. I've had situations where a child may jump on top of a table and start to say swear words, or walk down the hallway stripping down her clothes, acting provocative, and they'll assume, the school adults, that a child who exhibits sexual behavior has a history of sexual abuse. And if I were going to say, the take-home here is most children who've been abused do not develop these behaviors. And this is the key point. Most children who exhibit sexualized behavior do not have a history of sexual abuse. So that's the part that we want to help with schools understanding, because if you assume abuse has happened, what often happens is sometimes the parent will end up being filed on, or the school will file with DCSF to say there's reason to believe that this child, that we need to investigate this, and that may alienate the parent and delay appropriate interventions. So it's a delicate balance, because teachers are mandated reporters and they're not being asked to determine if abuse is happening, but it's just to raise within educators' and parents' minds that you want to be vigilant about abuse, but you also want to be thinking about, could there be other things that might be precipitating this kind of behavior.
And one of our members of our audience actually typed in something very, very pertinent, I think. Is it possibly because the child has cognitive delays?
Yes, that could definitely be something that could happen. Sorry, phone ringing, y'all. I'm really apologetic. Next time I'm going to sit with you, Jane, in your. I hope you all are enjoying your lunch while my dog's barking. Okay, so let's move on to so the question about cognitive delays is absolutely pertinent to the next topic that I'm going to be talking about, which is students with social deficits. So the ones where you'd see with cognitive delay might be more around self-soothing, but it also could be potentially that students with social deficits, and you could add in cognitive deficits, is actually one of the reasons I love to teach, is we didn't really address that, but I think it's very similar to what I'll be talking about with social deficits, which are that kids with social deficits have difficulty with the unwritten, nonverbal rules of social interaction. So they have difficulty processing body language, reading facial expressions, and capturing the tone of voice. So that can mean that they may not get the sort of subtle difference, or not so subtle difference, between playful teasing and threats, or they may miss cues with how to behave. So this can come up with children with nonverbal learning disorder, Asperger's syndrome, and autism spectrum disorders. And I've had an assessment that I did where actually the police had set up a sting operation because a boy who had Asperger's had figured out the phone number of someone and was calling the person repetitively and then was walking by the house where she lived, and it was being interpreted as him stalking, but it was really just a child who had a limited repertoire with how to express his interest in this other student. So students with social deficits may have difficulty with maintaining appropriate distance from others. Teachers can talk about how a child may come up and look directly at their breast, which can make them very uncomfortable. They may make repetitive, intrusive, or sexually inappropriate comments, or inappropriately touch peers or teachers.
Nancy, I think, can you go forward on the...
Yes.
Okay.
Okay,
Thank you.
thanks. We're caught up now. So, so just to kind of reiterate that part, which I again think is true with those kids with cognitive deficits, which is that it may result from a lack of understanding of what's okay to say and do and what isn't. And this is a really important point that I want to highlight. You know, when we'll talk about the function of behavior, one of the functions of behavior is to get attention. What frequently gets missed by when we look at this is that how efficient and predictable negative attention is and intense. So if a child with social deficits gets a huge reaction when they pinch a peer's bottom or you know, do something, talk about a teacher's bosoms, that if it has a huge kind of show-stop response, they may gravitate to doing that again because of the intensity of the response. So that's really critical when you're working with advocating how the school wants to respond, with how to be efficient with giving a consequence without high affect, because that might inadvertently reinforce it. So, okay. So the other aspect would be that, hold on, I'm just getting to use all this technology, is, whoops, going back to, I'm just, sorry, just want to get you to the right slide. The other aspect with students with social deficits is how easily they can be shamed, because if they don't understand the fundamental social rules, like not touching peers, it's super important that the school make an investment to explicitly teaching appropriate interactions. So we would think about social stories. There's the circle curriculum, which I'll talk about later. And what we want to also try to emphasize and encourage is for the school to ramp up times that they may notice positive things that the student's doing, and try to kind of amplify times when there may be facilitated teacher-student interactions so that the child may have positive experiences with their peers that the teacher's supporting.
Yes, and Nancy, one of the things that I know that you referred to later on in your presentation is the what I call the purple book, the teaching, helping traumatized children learn, and I believe they call them the islands of competence, to make every kid feel like they are very good at some particular thing.
You're right. That's a Bob Brooks did that.
Yes.
Yes. And you're so right to highlight that.
Yes. There's also a question about, it's more of a statement from someone in the audience about it's very difficult to have things going on in the home, which may be sexualized behaviors, and then to have them corrected at school and not in the home. So I know there's the two worlds of the kid, the school world and the homeschool.
Yeah.
And what do we do about that?
That's an excellent question.
Yeah.
What I I never, again, I love on-the-spot thinking, and I think what I would think about is the framework of bicultural competency, and that what a child may learn is that there are certain things that may be sanctioned at home, and then there's certain things that they can't do at the school. And what I hate to see is have people make the decision that because of what's going on at home, I'm not going to be able to modify the environment at the school to cultivate the kinds of behaviors that the child needs to do. Because, I mean, that's partly why we wrote the behavior code. Is I spent years sometimes hearing well-meaning administrators tell me all the reasons why little Bobby wasn't going to change because they'd had the 3 other sisters before, and that really, to me, is a very demoralizing stance to take, and it doesn't it negates the power of having 8 hours with our students, where our responses will shape how they flourish in a school setting. So that's my thoughts on that.
Thank you. Yes, thank you.
So if we think about impulsive students, John, I probably was one of those impulsive students, fortunately not around sexualized comments, but it's the frequent tendency to act before they think. And they may say things they know are inappropriate, but they can't stop blurting them out. And oftentimes these students, they actually, when you process it with them, they can understand the incident and feel remorse, so it's a little bit different than sometimes what you might have with kids on the spectrum who might not get the subtlety where, feeling bad about it. And those kids that are impulsive, sometimes they can have psychiatric disorders such as bipolar disorder, and that can particularly be more present when they're manic, and then those students with severe ADD. And again, those are kids sometimes that can get fast tickets to districts wanting to place them in a different setting. One student who would sort of blurt out at different times whore and slut, or say that one student who sort of blurted out that he was going to rape another third grader, said he was going to rape another child in the classroom. And the responses in that situation, first of all, I think supervision is really important, and redirection. But the supervision is, if you have an impulsive student who's going to do things without thinking and they have unsexualized behavior, it's really important for the school to ramp up the kind of supervision that's happening in the cafeteria, in the recess, and to really look at, are there places that are unsupervised in the backyard that we need to be more vigilant about. Definitely a referral for psychiatric evaluation if appropriate. I had a very compelling case of a student, the one that I was talking about, who was stripping down, kindergartner, stripping down, walking down the hallway, getting on the table and saying FFF, and having fairly aggressive behavior in the classroom where she had tipped over a bookcase. And fortunately, because we have in the district I work in the capacity to have access to a psychiatrist, we were able to bring the mother in, which the principal was incredible about getting the outreach to the mom to come in, because she was fairly upset about having been filed on. And there was extensive history of bipolar. And it's important to highlight with bipolar disorder, and this is another takeaway point, is that can be, hypersexual behavior can be the first presentation with bipolar disorder. And Geller's research looked very carefully with rigorous diagnosis of bipolar, doing various questionnaires and extensive interviewing, and found that only 10% of those children who had bipolar disorder, who presented with their first symptom being hypersexual, actually had abuse going on in the home. So 90% of those children didn't. And that's, I have seen situations where I've had students who are manic go into a psychiatric hospital and have hypersexual behavior and have us be able to stabilize them on medications and really be able to shift that. So the other aspect that I wanted to bring up around impulsive students, and this goes to what we were talking about in terms of home environment and school environment and where we can make an impact on the school environment, is how the peers reinforce behavior. So if sometimes teachers will get really frustrated with a child with sexualized behavior and say things like, he's instigating other peers to use inappropriate language to act badly. So in those situations, if you have a class that's on a point system, or there may be that you provide added incentive for children not to respond when a child is saying something inappropriate. And the next aspect in terms of impulsive students is to have within the IEP specific language that asks to teach the skill about stopping and thinking before speaking, and to have them learn self-regulation techniques. And that's something that you'd want to ask for the school counselor to provide, and you'd want them to make it specific to what you think would, a menu that would work with a student. So the next part that we're going to discuss is students with trauma histories. So, you know, sometimes parents may choose not to disclose history to the school. They may worry that educators may gossip about it, or you know, and where that's important is that there may be many classrooms where there are sort of silent sexually abused children, so those children who've experienced this, you know, and we don't know about it. You know, the kids that may come to our attention within the school setting may repeat the acts they were subjected to or saw, use sexual language, compulsively masturbate, or seek inappropriate relationships. And the kinds of specific symptoms that you may see are repetitive sexual talk and play, age-inappropriate sexual behavior, and fears of specific situations. And something to really highlight is that some of these students may have poor interpersonal boundaries and have a certain vulnerability because they lack the reflexes to protect themselves. I always feel really sad when we talk about traumatized kids, because I just think it's a huge burden that they bring into schools, and then they have to address the task of learning. So one aspect to talk about is, and this is particularly easier to do with littler kids, is how to minimize triggers. So there can be internal and external triggers, so certain smells, a change in safe adults, and it may be certain words or sounds. And an example would be, you know, a child who had been sexually abused by a male neighbor, and when an FBA or functional behavioral assessment was done, it turned out that the times that she would really become sort of make inappropriate comments and yet have poor boundaries was when the teacher during reading time would read a book that had a male character in it, and the response was to have a sort of a calm place in the class where she had a stack of books that were more soothing for her to be part of. So some of what you do with managing triggers is, you know, sometimes you can remove the triggers if you identify them, but the end point is to kind of help a traumatized child move from avoidance or fight or flight to being able to have some safe exposure in a safe environment to the triggers and be able to continue functioning. So that can be something that either is worked out with an outpatient therapist in working with a school counselor around that piece to manage that. And overarching is how important it is to have trauma-sensitive school environments, which is when you mentioned, Jane, about the Purple Book, which is from the Mass Advocates for Children. Zero tolerance really doesn't work with these kids. So giving them, suspensions and having them sit at home in an environment that sometimes may not have been safe for them can potentially open them up for more harsh punishments, and is a behavior, particularly with the little ones, where they really don't understand it. So you kind of need to strike a balance between protecting students and staff and holding children accountable for their actions, while also helping them build the skills to be able to, to function better. And that's often going to happen within the school setting. So the next part that I'm going to move to is, in our behavior code, we came up with an acronym, just because everybody in education knows acronyms. Can you still hear me?
We can, yep.
It's magic, you all, that you're all out here and you can hear me. Hello. The next part that I was going to move to was we had an acronym called FAIR, which was to look at the function of a behavior, to look at the accommodations, the interaction strategies, and the R, which is response. And it probably also was meant to highlight that, the students that we were addressing, oftentimes school staff can be relatively exhausted or annoyed or just want these kids to go away. And what we're trying to emphasize is that, these are kids with special needs, and the fair thing to do is to ramp up the support that we provide for these children so that they can function better. So if we talk about F, and that goes back to the parent's question about what do I ask a school for if my child has sexualized behavior, or there's and what I would highlight is to ask for a functional behavioral assessment, or to have a teacher be able to use what's called ABC data. And what the A stands for is antecedents, looking at what's going on before, then to look at the behavior, and then the consequence. And that it's useful when you're trying to identify what the function of the behavior is, or the motivation of the behavior, to look for at least 5 incidences. And it's also important to look at, what we call setting events, and that's particularly relevant with children who have had trauma happen to them. So it's pretty common sense. If you have a father that just came out of jail and has reinitiated visitation rights, and you see an escalation in sexualized behavior, that's something where you probably don't want to be punishing the student. You want to be able to address the setting event. And when you do this ABC data, and this is just a cheat sheet to show you what it looks like for parents who may not have seen this, you look for patterns there, and the kinds of patterns that you may anticipate seeing with students with sexualized behavior are unexpected changes. So if you have, say, a substitute teacher, that could be the loss of a safe adult that sort of helps a traumatized child kind of regulate themselves, and you may see problematic behavior. Times when students are in close proximity, so circle time, standing in line, and unstructured times, cafeteria transitions, and environmental triggers. And the kind of consequence you want to look at is, what's the negative tension? What I can tell you is, if you end up as a parent or an educational advocate getting an incident report on sexualized behavior, where, I don't know if you can see my pointer, but where you'll get the most information is around the behavior. And very little attention will be focused on what was going on prior to the antecedent, prior to the behavior, and what the response was. And that's where the money is, because you want to be able to work with the school to figure out how to manage the antecedents and what's going on before. So if we look at accommodations, if part of what we were saying is that transitions are problematic and close physical proximity to other students, it may be important to have boundaries where you, say in morning meeting time, you have masking tape or chairs that keep the children separate. You may want to have a particular place where a student may be able to regroup when they're overstimulated. Another aspect that can be frequently overlooked, which is an important one to think about, is bathroom accommodations. And sometimes it has to be negotiated either to have a nurse's office be used, or sometimes not so popular, but the staff room as a place for a child to go. And that can be partly, if you have a traumatized child, it may be really overstimulating for them to go into the boys' bathroom, and it may be easier just to eliminate that. But also, if you, in terms of allaying other parents' anxiety, that's a place where you could make a modification to sort of reassure parents that you're taking steps to provide more supervision.
Nancy, one of our participants typed in that by the time 5 incidents occurred, they would have probably gone through a manifestation determination review, which would have triggered. Yes, because it would trigger the FBA anyway. So I just wanted to make sure that we're not expecting 5 incidents to happen before any action is taken, I guess.
That's true. I'm glad you're highlighting that. But the reality is that sometimes these are students that are in self-contained classrooms.
Okay.
They are already sort of been in a more restrictive setting.
Yes.
And they're displaying sexualized behavior. That might have been why they ended up in a self-contained classroom. So it's a really good point, though, which is the overarching idea that if you're collecting data like this, you hopefully have an individual ed plan that's providing some safeguards with it. I like that. You all are critical thinkers. You know, another aspect I would say is that frequently gets overlooked in individual ed plans around this kind of behavior is the emphasis on teaching self-regulation and self-monitoring, so that that there's not just a resort to disciplining kids, but to being able to help them with some self-reflection, and also about what can they do when they may, for instance, when we were talking about the child with cognitive deficits, what kind of self-regulation can we provide for them rather than resorting to sexualized behavior or sexually stimulating behavior. Okay, this is just to provide you, there's the CIRCLE curriculum, which has been used in school settings, and it's a 3-day training, but it's something that certainly educational advocates and parents might ask for with traumatized kids, is whether where there is explicit instruction around both working with kids to identify who's the family, friends, acquaintance, professional, and then what's the appropriate language to use with different people in those different categories, and then what's the expectation of distance that you might be negotiating with people that are in those different categories. So in terms of interaction strategies, what can be true is sometimes there's a real attention has to be paid to the kind of contact that's appropriate or not appropriate for staff. And in some ways I think we've almost erred on the side of sterility in school settings, with our vigilance, of course, of not wanting them kids to be taken advantage of, and for adults to be appropriate about boundaries. And but sometimes students will want some kind of connection, and so particularly if you have a child who might have been abused, who kind of wants to sit in your lap all the time as a teacher, and that's not comfortable for a teacher, it may be that they develop a personalized handshake that allows them to kind of connect, but not to have it be crossing the boundary. Another aspect that, again, might be actually written into an IEP is to talk about how a teacher may approach them, and the idea that you don't approach from behind or around the level of the voice, allowing extra personal space. Sometimes when you have a impulsive child or a child that's been traumatized that seems escalated, a teacher may actually approach the student as a way to try to regulate them, and it actually ends up going in the opposite direction. So that's another important kind of feedback to be able to alert a teacher, and particularly if you're a parent that kind of recognizes that distance might actually provide a more calming, self-regulating process. That's a good thing to introduce. And the other aspect is to be, as teachers and as parents, is to be careful around the negative statements, so that the idea that you want to give it in a neutral way versus a shaming way, and kind of do it in a way. Sometimes people will say, "Oh, that's the kid who always does this," and those kind of extreme all or nothing talk is something that we definitely want to try to support people not doing. And the other aspect that we really encourage is to provide, and again it goes back to what you were talking about, Jane, with islands of competency.
Yes, yeah.
Be able to provide predictable attention. So sometimes in these situations you almost will have a teacher have a timer on their desk, which they'll hit just to say, have I checked in with the student? Is so that you can kind of beat them at the pass, so that they're not instigating something to get attention, but that you're trying to provide positive attention in a very predictable way. So we're on the home stretch, y'all, and we're heading towards talk about response strategies now. So the thing with sexualized statements is it's important to figure out proactively what the consequences are, and then to have a teacher not kind of react in a really strong, vehement way, but say it's that they're going to lose recess, or they're going to have to do a self-reflection paper, or whatever it is, to have that. You don't want to ignore that the rule's been broken, but you might sort of state what the consequence is, and then try to keep moving back to what the activity is. And the aspect that's also important is that for those kids that have impulsivity or social deficits, I think there should be consequences as a way to kind of help them both repair the relationship and be able to kind of internalize necessary behavior. I think that with abuse history, that it's something that's really important to be able to teach the child in a way that's non-shaming and gives language that's forceful in a gentle way. So the kind of thing where you might say, that makes me uncomfortable, and then walk away. But it doesn't work as well to shame the student or take away a privilege in that context. Okay. So the other aspect to think about, and again we talked about it a little bit before, is those students who may invade peers' personal space, that you may want to think about having a consistent personal space rules for the whole class. So as we talked about, you may have chairs at circle time or tape on the floor, and you may need to give prompts, sort of in the Sarah Ward mode of sort of what do you need to be doing with your body now, and cue a child about when they're too close. And as I talked about before, really ramp out giving praise when you see a child being able to kind of keep appropriate boundaries. The last kind of student I want to talk about, which I saved for last, was about students who masturbate in class. And if you have more questions about that, Jessica's done a lot of FBAs on students who may masturbate in class. But some of the suggestions that we had talked about were using fidget toys to keep, and again, this probably comes with kids who may have cognitive delays, who you want to have them use fidget toys to keep their hands busy, reinforce when they have their hands on their desk, be neutral and matter of fact when discussing, and it can be helpful for a teacher to sort of establish a secret signal. I remember a teacher who consulted with me where it would be totally distracting to her, where she'd be giving a reading lesson and the child would be rubbing up and down on the chair, kind of self-stimulating herself as she was trying to teach 15 other kids. And what she had really hoped for was that the teacher before would have communicated things that worked when this behavior happened, and what she developed was a secret signal that helped alert the student to what she was doing, and then using self-monitoring and reinforcement can be useful. My thing just went crazy. I just want to go to the end. So the slide all went away, you guys. I just wanted to say one other last aspect, which is around secondary trauma. These are kids that can really exhaust both staff and parents. And it's really important to have self-care when you're supporting these kinds of students, because otherwise it can build up to resentment and exhaustion, and so that's another highlight that I would say, is that this is not, this kind of behavior can generate a lot of anxiety in school staff, and they want to, if possible, provide a forum where the treatment team can kind of, I mean, it's not vent, but it's to be able to recognize that this is, that it has a toll on providers. So,
Nancy, just a couple of things before we, first of all, can you go to the last slide in the PowerPoint?
It sort of went crazy at the end.
It went crazy at the end. Okay, so go to the.
Oh wait, maybe I go to play and.
Yeah, start over again, and it's the last one because it has some information.
Our next webinar.
Yeah, and then scroll forward one more time.
Here. Thank
Down
you.
at the bottom. Yep. Mm-hmm.
Where do you want me to scroll? Keep going.
To the thank you one, because there's some information.
Thank you.
There you go. Okay. So there were a couple of questions that came in right at the end, and I don't want to cut you off, but just before we go, someone asked if there were behavior specialists out there who were particularly trauma-informed, and is it necessary to have someone trauma-informed if they're going to be doing an FBA for a sexualized child?
Oh, what a great question.
Yeah.
I think you could ask for that, and Jessica will be better able to address that because that's her specialty. But in my experience with some behavioral specialists is they are very what's called data-driven.
Yes.
And so they go after this antecedent behavior consequences. I can say this because Jess is not here, but she'll talk later. It's kind of robotic. And part of the reason why I teamed up with Jess is I was so frustrated at being a child psychiatrist, consulting, and feeling like I was being intimidated by the fact that people could make graphs and show all these lines and stuff. You think webinars intimidate me? You should see graphs. And I thought it was so important, and now I know how to do combat when I'm sitting at an IEP. And when I get into the, not that I try to be collaborative, but when I'm in these situations where there's all this discussion around the point system, I'll try to emphasize the relationship and how, and I think, I'm so grateful that that question was asked, because it's really what's seminal to a traumatized kid is to build a relationship. And that often gets overlooked when you start to get behavior analysts, because they'll get into point systems and it won't always emphasize the relationship. So
the emotional part of it, yes. Yeah.
Building the relationship and the kind of language that you need to use, and the fact that with kids who've been traumatized, power doesn't work, and that sometimes behavioral plans can be used as a hammer, and you're kind of bludgeoning a kid into submission, and for a traumatized kid, submission means horrible abuse. So
that's right.
It's not healthy. So I guess
it would be the best of both worlds if you could find one.
Yes, if there's, I know Jess does really good behavioral plans and really emphasizes that, but I don't think there's a cohort out there that sort of have marketed themselves as trauma
focused, yes. And maybe that's happening as we're speaking. Just so that the audience knows, the Federation in their newsline is running a series of articles about trauma sensitivity with regard to how much information to share, trauma-sensitive evaluations, IEP meetings, this kind of stuff. So if you want to go on our website and see, we're on the second article of that series. The other thing, Nancy, that someone wrote into about was that the trauma triggers of teachers, which I have mentioned.
Oh, that's such a smart idea to bring up.
Yes.
Your audience is great. Can I come back again, Jane?
Absolutely.
That's a great one, and that's so important.
Yep.
So where I've seen that happen is I actually see that more around safety assessments I've done around violence and aggression than I have with sexualized behavior, interestingly enough. But maybe I haven't known to be as, maybe I haven't asked the right questions. But certainly I've seen that with kids who are physically aggressive, that can be enormously evocative for teachers who may have had their own trauma history. If that's what you were talking about, I think that where, I don't even like the word trauma trigger. The word trigger has such a sort of, I don't know, it's such an aggressive sound to it now, because you think
that's true. Yep.
But I guess the word I would use is that for any of us working with kids who are physically aggressive or have sexualized behavior, it's incredibly evocative, and it can bring up issues of control, boundaries, safety, and so because I in some ways don't want to pathologize teachers by saying that they're having trauma triggers, but I think those teachers who may have had their own sense of betrayal with adults may have a particularly difficult time working with this population.
Yes.
Or in another way, they may have some sensitivity, and they just might need to have a heightened awareness about how important the self-care is.
Yes, yeah. So thank you, Nancy. There's also a question here about the Purple Book. We've been mentioning it, and I have not told anybody how to get a hold of it. If you are an SESP, we give them out at orientations, but they are free for download on the web.
Yes. If you put in Massachusetts Advocates for Children's, or if you just put in, I think, Helping Traumatized Children Learn, it's on the slide right before the Helping Traumatized Children Learn. It should pop up.
Yeah.
That book. I mean, it has, it's always tough with those. What I found, and I have tremendous respect about how that organization brought into people's awareness the role of trauma. It can be incredibly challenging as a teacher or as a parent to get a school to embrace that. It usually has to start with the principal having a orientation towards that, and really is part of the culture of a school. So One
Yes.
thing I wanted to mention to folks is that my website, just in case people wanted to contact me afterwards, it's nancyrappaport.com, and it's all. And if you just put in my name, it'll pop up, RAPPAPORT, and I'd love to hear from any of you all to think more about this.
Thank you so much, Nancy. And let's see, was there something else? Oh, the PowerPoint will be available on our website in the very near future. It is not available at this time, and we are working hard to get it up for you to see. The whole thing will be there with the audio also. Again, please, if you would like to join our teleconference on Thursday, fill in your questions in the survey that will come up after the webinar is over, or you can email me at jcreco@fcsn.org. All right, I think we're about done. Nancy, thank you again, and we'll talk again on Thursday.
Great.
Thank
My
you.
pleasure. Can't wait to talk with you all on Thursday.
All right. Thank you, Nancy.
Thank you so much.